The glossy brochure slammed onto my marble kitchen island with a heavy smack. Shady Pines Assisted Living. I looked up from my sweet tea to see my own daughter smiling down at me, her eyes dead. "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern, "this 5-bedroom house is just too much for you to handle. We need the space for the kids. The movers arrive on Friday." She thought I was losing my mind. She thought I was a fragile old widow who would just pack my bags and hand over my $1.5 million estate in Alpharetta without a fight. What she did not know was that before Friday morning ever arrived, I would sell the house right out from under her, take every single penny, and disappear across state lines without asking either of them for permission. It was a Tuesday morning. The Georgia sun was pouring through the bay windows of the house Elias and I built from the ground up. My husband, Elias, was a pioneering black architect here in Atlanta, and I spent 40 years working as a sought-after commercial real estate appraiser. We paid this house off back in 2005. I was 68 years old, sharp as a tack, and enjoying a quiet retirement. Until my daughter Tasha and her husband Marcus barged through my front door unannounced. Tasha dropped that cheap nursing home brochure right next to my breakfast plate. She stood there crossing her arms, her designer handbag hanging off her wrist. A bag I knew for a fact Marcus could not afford. Marcus stood right behind her, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He always wore suits that were a little too tight, trying to look like a high roller, when I knew he was just a shady investment broker pushing terrible cryptocurrency schemes to people who did not know any better. Tasha leaned over the counter. "Mom, we have been talking. Your memory is slipping. You left the stove on twice last week." Which was a complete lie. I am meticulous about my kitchen. But she did not miss a beat. She pointed around my beautiful home, her eyes tracing the custom mahogany crown molding Elias had installed by hand. "This Alpharetta neighborhood is changing. It is not safe for you to be here all alone. Marcus and I are going to move in and take over the property taxes. We found a lovely care facility for you in South Fulton. They are expecting you on Friday morning." I did not raise my voice. I took a slow sip of my tea. I looked at the brochure. Shady Pines, a state-run facility with terrible reviews and chronic understaffing. They wanted to rip me out of my home of 30 years and lock me in a clinical room with linoleum floors. I knew exactly what this was. Tasha had always been addicted to a lifestyle she could not finance, trying to keep up with internet influencers. And Marcus was always looking for a shortcut to wealth. They saw a $1.5 million property sitting free and clear, and they saw an old woman they thought they could easily manipulate. I set my glass down. "Friday, you say? That is very sudden, Tasha." Marcus stepped in, rubbing the back of his neck. "It is for your own good, Mama Gloria. We already filed the preliminary paperwork for a medical power of attorney. The doctor signed off based on our reports of your cognitive decline. We do not want to have to force you out legally. It would be so much better if you just cooperated and went quietly." They were threatening me. My own flesh and blood stood in my kitchen and threatened to drag me into court to declare me incompetent if I did not surrender my home. 40 years of surviving the cutthroat Atlanta real estate market taught me one crucial rule: never show your cards to a hostile buyer. I let my shoulders slump. I made my hands tremble just a little. I looked down at the marble counter and sighed. "If you really think it is what is best for the family," I said, forcing my voice to sound weak and defeated. Tasha smiled. It was a cold, victorious smile. "I knew you would understand, Mom. Start packing. We will be back this afternoon with a property inspector. We need to make sure the foundation is solid before we bring the kids in." They turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the kitchen. The moment the front door clicked shut, my hands stopped trembling. A property inspector. If they were just moving in, they would not need a formal inspection. You only inspect a house you already own if you are trying to pull money out of it. They were hiding something massive. For the next hour, I did something Tasha would never have expected from the helpless woman she thought she had created. I went to my study and pulled the closing file from the year Elias and I paid off the mortgage. The original deed was there, along with title insurance surveys, tax receipts, and every renovation permit we had filed. My name was the only living owner's name on the record. Elias's estate had been settled years earlier. Tasha had no ownership interest, no signed promise, and no legal right to decide where I lived. I also checked the county property portal and saved a current copy of the ownership record. Nothing had changed online. That did not mean Marcus had done nothing. A forged deed could be sitting in a file waiting to be recorded. But it told me he had not yet completed the transfer. I called the number on the Shady Pines brochure without identifying myself and asked ordinary questions about admissions. The receptionist told me they did not send transport vans to remove unwilling residents and that admission required consent or valid legal authority. That answer exposed another layer of Tasha's bluff. She was counting on paperwork and intimidation, not on a facility having some secret power to drag me from my house. I put the brochure beside the deed and photographed them together. One represented what my daughter wanted me to believe. The other represented what was true. Then I returned both to separate places so a single search of my desk could not take everything from me. By the time Marcus returned with his supposed inspector, I was no longer asking whether my children were trying to take advantage of me. I was trying to determine exactly how they planned to do it. True to their word. Marcus returned at 2 o'clock that afternoon with a man he introduced as a certified home inspector. The man wore khakis and carried a clipboard, but he lacked the heavy tool belt, the flashlight, and the dirty boots a real inspector usually carries. I trailed behind them as they walked through my house. I played the role of the confused, compliant mother, nodding slowly and keeping my hands clasped together like I was frightened. But I was listening. I was listening to every single word coming out of this man's mouth. We stood in the living room right beneath the vaulted ceilings. The man tapped the wall and looked at Marcus. "The after-repair value on this open floor plan is incredible," he said, scribbling on his clipboard. "You could easily pull maximum equity out of this footprint within days." My ears instantly pricked up. Real home inspectors do not talk about after-repair value. They talk about load-bearing walls, termite damage, and HVAC systems. After-repair value is a term used exclusively by hard money lenders and predatory property flippers. I decided to test him. I pointed to a decorative pillar in the hallway. "Oh, I hope that load-bearing column is still safe," I muttered. The man barely glanced at it. Yeah, the load-bearing looks fine structurally." I almost laughed out loud. The pillar was hollow drywall. It bore zero weight. This man was not an inspector. He was an appraiser for a private lender. Then we went down to the basement. The man glanced at my water heater for exactly 2 seconds before turning back to Marcus. "The loan-to-value ratio checks out. With a clear title, my boss can expedite the underwriting by tomorrow evening. As long as the primary resident is vacated by Friday morning, the funds will be released by Friday afternoon." Marcus wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. His hands were actually shaking. "She will be gone Friday morning. I guarantee it. Just make sure the syndicate has the cash ready. I need to clear my balance before the weekend. Syndicate, cash ready, loan-to-value ratio." The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my mind. Marcus was not taking my house to live in it. He was using my home as collateral for a massive high-interest loan from a shadow lending group. I quietly slid my left hand into my cardigan pocket, tapped the face of my smartwatch, and hit record. I made sure to capture every word of their conversation as we walked back upstairs. I played the sweet, oblivious grandmother perfectly. I even offered the man a bottle of water before he left. When Marcus kissed my cheek on his way out, telling me to keep packing my bags, it took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to strike him across the face. After Marcus and the fake inspector left, I wrote down every phrase I remembered before memory could soften the edges. After repair value. Loan-to-value ratio. Clear title. Funds released Friday. Primary resident vacated. I had spent my career writing appraisal notes that might later be reviewed by banks' attorneys or courts, so I knew the difference between an impression and a contemporaneous record. The man's business card carried a company name I did not recognize. A quick search of the Georgia licensing database showed no home inspection license under that company. The address on the card belonged to a shared office suite used by several private lenders. I did not need to uncover his whole career. I only needed enough to confirm my instinct. Marcus had brought a lender's representative into my house while pretending he was checking the foundation for my safety. I locked the notes and screenshots in my study and left the rest of the house undisturbed. I still did not know how much Tasha understood or how far Marcus's lenders were willing to go. Before I confronted anyone, I needed to decide who could safely know what I had learned and how to preserve the advantage of being underestimated. I also made a decision about who not to tell. Atlanta was full of people who loved me, but family crises travel faster through church parking lots and group messages than through official channels. If I called every cousin and friend to announce that Tasha was trying to steal my house, someone would eventually confront her, warn her, or ask Marcus a question that told him I was alert. At that point, only Andre knew what I suspected. By Wednesday, I would add a lawyer and the bank manager to that circle, but nobody else needed the story while the danger was still moving. I did not post anything online. I did not call Tasha's friends. I did not try to shame her into stopping. Public embarrassment might have felt satisfying, but it would have destroyed the only advantage I still had. She believed I was confused. Silence also protected Andre. He would not have to spend the next day answering messages from adults asking whether his parents were criminals. If the plan failed, investigators would receive documents and recordings instead of a cloud of gossip. I had learned that discipline in commercial disputes. The loudest party often revealed the most. The party who documented first and spoke later usually had more room to move. By evening, my silence was already helping. Tasha called twice to remind me to pack. Marcus sent a brief message asking whether the inspector had frightened me. I answered only that I was tired and wanted to rest. He replied with a thumbs up. I saved the message because even that tiny response told me he still believed the performance. I ate a simple dinner, washed my glass, and left 2 packing boxes open near the stairs where the porch camera could catch them if Marcus checked remotely. Then I went to my bedroom with the notebook from the afternoon inspection. I was trying to decide whether to contact a title lawyer first or freeze my credit first when at exactly midnight I heard a soft scratching sound at my bedroom door. The handle turned slowly. A tall, slender figure slipped into the room and locked the door behind him. It was Andre, my 16-year-old grandson, Tasha, and Marcus's oldest child. Andre was quiet, usually buried in an oversized hoodie and a computer screen. Tasha treated his intelligence as an inconvenience because it did not fit the polished family image she liked to display, and Marcus disliked how often the boy asked precise questions. I had taught Andre to read paid for his advanced coding camps and listened when he talked about Morehouse College as if saying the name could pull his future closer. That night, however, there was no excitement in his face. "Grandma," he whispered, "are you awake?" I turned on the bedside lamp. He dropped his backpack, opened his laptop, and said the sentence that changed the entire scale of the problem. "Grandma, you are in immediate danger. They are going to kill him, and they are going to take everything you have." I sat up straight, the maternal alarm bells ringing in my chest. Who is going to kill who? Slow down, Andre. Breathe. He opened his laptop. The harsh blue screen illuminated his terrified face. I hacked into Dad's private email servers, he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He uses the same password for his crypto wallets and his hidden accounts. I heard them screaming at each other in the garage yesterday. "Grandma, Mom, and Dad are not moving into this house." "I know," I said calmly. "Your father brought a hard money lender here today. They are taking out a loan against my equity." Andre shook his head, his eyes wide with absolute dread. "No, Grandma. It is worse. It is so much worse than a bank loan." He turned the laptop screen toward me. I stared at the screen. It was a scanned copy of a quitclaim deed, a sensitive legal document that officially transfers property ownership from one person to another. And right there at the bottom of the page was my signature. Except I had never signed it. It was a masterful forgery notarized by someone I had never met. "Look at the emails," Andre urged, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. I read the highlighted text on the screen. It was an email chain between Marcus and a man known only in the local underground as Silas. I knew that name from the local news. Silas ran a ruthless, predatory lending syndicate out of the west end of Atlanta. They did not deal with traditional banks. They dealt with extortion, money laundering, and severe violence. The email detailed the horrifying truth. Marcus had lost a staggering $600,000 of the syndicate's money in a disastrous offshore cryptocurrency scam. The syndicate had given Marcus a final deadline. He had to hand over the deed to a property worth at least $1 million to cover the principal debt and the astronomical interest, or he would pay with his life. The deadline was this Friday at 5 o'clock in the evening. "They forged your signature," Andre said, tears brimming in his eyes. "Dad promised the syndicate they could take immediate possession of this house on Friday to liquidate it. That is why Mom wants to lock you in that horrible nursing home on Friday morning. If you are locked in a psychiatric ward, legally declared confused by their fake doctor, you cannot fight the property transfer. And the house will be empty when Silas and his armed men show up to take the keys." The sheer gravity of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My daughter was not just greedy, she was willing to throw her own mother into a facility lockup to save her husband from the violent criminals he got into bed with. She was sacrificing my life to save his. But then I looked at Andre. He was trembling, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. If Dad does not give them this house, the email says they are going to come after our family next. They know where I go to school, Grandma. They know my routine. The cold reality washed over me. This was no longer just a white-collar real estate scam. This was a matter of life and death. If I simply called the police right now to report a forged deed, Marcus could panic before anyone had protected Andre from the people behind the debt. I could not just play defense. I had to destroy Marcus's leverage, secure the value of my life's work, and get my grandson out of the blast zone before Friday morning. I looked at the digital clock on my nightstand. It was 12:30 in the morning on Wednesday. I had exactly 48 hours before the wolves arrived at my front door. I closed Andre's laptop and placed both hands on his shaking shoulders. Andre listened to me very carefully. You are going to go back home before your parents wake up. You are going to act like everything is normal. Before he left, I made him show me the forged deed one more time. I compared the signature against 3 documents I knew I had signed in front of witnesses. The imitation was good enough to fool someone glancing at a screen, but the final stroke of my last name leaned the wrong direction. Elias used to tease me that I signed my name like I was drawing a roofline. Whoever copied it had reproduced the shape without understanding the habit behind it. The notary block worried me more. A seal and commission number gave a false document the appearance of ceremony. I photographed the notary information so my attorney could verify it independently. Then I asked Andre to isolate the messages that showed who knew about Friday and who knew the threat had reached him. One exchange suggested Tasha understood far more than she had admitted. I did not tell Andre anything the evidence could not prove. I said I knew she was participating in the property scheme, and I knew she wanted me out by Friday. We would let the documents and recordings establish the rest. He nodded, but the question stayed in his face. I walked him to the side door and watched until he reached the corner. When I returned upstairs, the house felt different. Every room still held 30 years of our family's life, but the paperwork on my desk had turned it into a contested asset. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a mother trying to understand her daughter and started thinking like an owner protecting title. Andre slipped back home before dawn Wednesday, exactly as we had agreed. He texted me from his bedroom at 5:40 to say he was inside without waking anyone. 10 minutes later, I deleted the message from the preview screen, but kept a protected copy in the evidence folder. We were learning to distinguish between hiding evidence and protecting it. At 7, Tasha solved our access problem without knowing it. She messaged Andre and ordered him to spend the day at my house, helping me sort electronics for the move. She thought his presence would make the nursing home transition feel ordinary. I told him to come exactly when she expected him, not a minute earlier. Before he arrived, I called his school attendance office and said a family emergency would keep him out for 2 days. I gave no dramatic explanation. The thread in Marcus's messages referred to Andre's normal bus schedule, so the safest immediate move was to make that routine stop existing. I saved the attendance confirmation and forwarded a copy to the attorney I had decided to contact as soon as the morning visit was over. Andre arrived at 8:30, carrying the same backpack he used for school. He left his phone in plain sight on the kitchen counter, location services appearing normal, while his laptop stayed upstairs with automatic cloud backups disabled. I told him we were not going to turn him into a spy. His job was to be a witness only when he could observe something from a place he already had a right to be. He nodded, but I could see how badly he wanted to do more. Fear makes action feel like control, especially to a 16-year-old. I made him eat toast and eggs and asked him 3 ordinary questions about school until his breathing slowed. Then we copied the forged deed, the threatening emails, and the lender recording onto a second encrypted drive. One copy would stay with me. The other would leave the house with counsel as soon as I could arrange it. At 8:40, a car door closed in the driveway. Tasha's voice floated through the foyer, bright and falsely cheerful. She announced that the concierge doctor had arrived for my wellness evaluation. Andre took his backpack upstairs without running. I remained at the kitchen table long enough to finish my tea. The next move belonged to them, and for the first time since midnight, we were ready to watch carefully without interfering. Tasha entered with a man in a tailored gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. She introduced him as a concierge medical specialist who had agreed to perform a routine cognitive evaluation before my move. Marcus followed several steps behind them, pretending the visit had nothing to do with the property. I knew exactly what the appointment was meant to accomplish. A forged power of attorney looked stronger if it was paired with a professional document suggesting I could not understand or challenge it. I sat in my armchair and let the doctor speak to me in the slow, careful tone people sometimes use when they have already decided an older person is incapable. He checked my blood pressure, asked me to count backward by sevens, then questioned me about the date, the year, and recent events. I had spent decades calculating capitalization rates and projected returns in my head. I could have answered every question before he finished asking it. Instead, I paused at 79, frowned as if the numbers were slipping away, and gave him the year Elias and I bought the house when he asked me the current year. I made the performance believable, not theatrical. A woman who could remember nothing would have frightened them and perhaps triggered real emergency care. A woman who seemed just confused enough to need supervision was exactly what they wanted. I answered 2 questions correctly after missing 1, because gradual decline would look more convincing than a sudden collapse. The doctor wrote quickly. Tasha watched his pen with a smile she tried to hide. She touched my knee and told me I was doing fine, but her eyes never left the page. Marcus asked whether the report could be ready before lunch. The doctor said he would prepare a preliminary assessment immediately. When the examination ended, I thanked him politely and remained in the chair while they walked toward the front door. Andre was upstairs, standing behind the curtain of the guest bedroom that overlooked the driveway. From there, he had a clear view of the doctor's sedan and every reason to be in the house because Tasha herself had sent him to help me pack. Marcus waited beside the car. Andre's phone captured Marcus handing over a thick white envelope and the doctor passing him a signed preliminary evaluation in return. The exchange was brief, direct, and impossible to confuse with a handshake between friends. Once the sedan left and Marcus drove away separately, Andre came downstairs. We reviewed the video together, noted the time preserved the original file, and sent an encrypted copy to an account outside the family network. I told Andre not to edit, crop enhance, or add captions. A clean original was more valuable than a dramatic clip. Then I put on my Navy business suit. I was not angry enough to rush. The bribe gave us direct proof that the false medical evaluation was part of a coordinated attack on my autonomy. Now I needed to learn how far Marcus had already pushed that false authority into the financial system. I told Tasha I was going to the pharmacy for my arthritis prescription and drove instead to the private bank in Buckhead, where Elias and I had kept our accounts for years. The senior branch manager knew me well enough to recognize at once that there was nothing confused about the woman who sat across from his desk. He turned his monitor toward me and showed me what had happened that morning. Marcus had arrived shortly after the bank opened, carrying the doctor's preliminary evaluation and a document presented as a power of attorney. He had asked the bank to freeze my checking and savings accounts and route future decisions through him. The manager refused to give him control because the paperwork was incomplete. The signatures did not match records on file, and the request itself looked like possible elder financial abuse. Instead, he placed a temporary security alert on the accounts and attempted to contact me directly. Then he showed me the request that made my anger settle into something colder. Marcus had also tried to reach Andre's education trust. Elias had funded that account so our grandson could attend Morehouse without beginning his adult life buried in debt. The balance was a little over $80,000. Marcus had claimed the money was needed for my emergency medical care and had tried to liquidate it before anyone could question him. That told me 2 things. First, the house was not his only target. Second, the $2 million syndicate deadline was putting him under enough pressure to burn his son's future, along with mine. I asked the manager to print the attempted transaction history note. The time Marcus appeared, preserve the security footage, and place a fraud warning on every account connected to my Social Security number. I also called an attorney I had trusted during my appraisal career and authorized the bank to speak with him. I could have called the police from the chair in that office, but an immediate arrest was not the same thing as immediate safety. If Marcus vanished into custody before the syndicate understood why its collateral had disappeared, the men behind the debt could still come to my home or Andre's school. I needed the financial theft stopped that day, the evidence preserved, and the house moved out of Marcus's reach before Friday. The criminal case could follow once my grandson was no longer standing in the middle of it. With my attorney on speakerphone, the branch manager, and I built a lawful barrier around the assets Marcus had tried to seize. We changed every access credential, revoked any pending third-party authority, flagged the education trust against unusual withdrawals, and moved my liquid investments into a newly established asset protection trust controlled by me. Andre remained the protected beneficiary of his education money, and Tasha and Marcus had no authority over it. What I needed was a lawful structure, documents executed correctly, records filed promptly, and institutions instructed to refuse forged authority. I left exactly $400 in the checking account Tasha knew about. It was enough to cover ordinary household expenses, and more importantly enough to keep her from realizing I had changed the structure beneath her feet. If she logged in and saw a normal-looking balance, she would assume I was still dependent on her. I wanted that assumption to survive until the house was sold. Before I left, the manager handed me a packet containing certified copies of the fraud alerts, the attempted trust withdrawal, and the bank's internal notes about Marcus's visit. My attorney arranged to receive duplicate copies by courier. The paper trail was becoming as important as the money itself. When I returned home, Tasha was in the kitchen sorting moving boxes. She asked whether I had remembered my medication. I nodded, let my shoulders sag, and shuffled toward the stairs. The performance had become exhausting, but it was buying us time. Andre was waiting in my bedroom with headphones around his neck. He had captured an audio file from a call Marcus made after leaving the bank. I told him not to dig any deeper into systems that were not his. We already had enough evidence to protect ourselves. Before he touched the play button, we preserved the original file and made a clean copy for Attorney Vance. Then Andre pressed play. The recording began with Marcus asking for more time. The man on the other end never raised his voice, which made him more frightening. He told Marcus that the debt was now $2 million after the losses, fees, and interest, and that the deadline remained Friday at 5 in the afternoon. Marcus promised him a property worth $1.5 million. He said the quitclaim deed was already signed, the owner would be removed Friday morning, and the house would be empty when the syndicate came for it. Then the caller mentioned the exact time Andre usually stepped off his school bus. The threat was unmistakable. If Marcus failed, the danger would not stop with Marcus. Andre's face went pale. For a moment, he asked whether the simplest answer was to let his father have the house. I understood the instinct. A deed could be replaced. A life could not. But surrendering the property would not make men like that disappear. It would teach them that threatening a 16-year-old worked, and Marcus would still be the same desperate man who had gambled with money that did not belong to him. I saved 3 copies of the call, one for my attorney, one for the bank's fraud file, and one for law enforcement when the time came. By early Wednesday afternoon, I was back at home with the bank documents locked in my study and Attorney Vance on a secure call. The next work belonged to counsel, not the teller counter. He prepared written revocations of any powers of attorney that might be used out of context, instructed the relevant institutions to require direct verification before acting on claims about my capacity, and opened a formal file concerning the suspected forged deed. We discussed the central decision of the week, whether I could sell the house fast enough to remove it from Marcus's scheme without creating a new legal problem of my own. The residential value was around $1.5 million, but a conventional sale could take weeks of showings, inspection periods, financing contingencies, and buyer hesitation. I did not have weeks. A lower cash price could be rational if it bought speed certainty and a buyer with its own title team. That was a calculation I understood from commercial work. Time itself can be part of value. Attorney Vance asked me to identify any buyer who had already studied the parcel and had a reason to move quickly. Only one name fit. Richard Vance of Apex Development had tried for years to acquire my corner lot as part of a larger retail assembly. He already knew the zoning and frontage, and he had the staff and cash to perform a real closing without pretending rules did not exist. I had not called him yet. Before I did counsel, made me write down my minimum price, my deadline, and the conditions I would not waive. That simple exercise mattered. I was not going to let fear turn me into the distressed seller Marcus assumed I was. I would sell because I chose to on terms I could defend later, and every step would leave a clean paper trail. That afternoon, Attorney Vance also checked the notary information from the forged deed. The commission number belonged to a real notary, but the address on the document did not match the address in the state registry. Vance contacted the title insurer's fraud department and advised them that a suspected forged instrument involving my property might be presented for recording or financing. He did not accuse the notary publicly or ask anyone to arrest her based on our suspicion. He created a formal warning so that if the document surfaced, professionals handling the transaction would know to verify it. We also placed a title monitoring alert on the property. Such alerts cannot prevent every fraudulent filing, but they can notify an owner when a deed or lien is recorded. I wanted no more surprises. Vance asked whether I wanted him to seek an emergency court order immediately. We discussed it carefully. An injunction could protect the house, but filing publicly on Wednesday would reveal that I knew about Marcus's plan. That could push him into panic before Andre and I were out of Georgia, because the county record still showed me as owner, and a legitimate cash sale was already being arranged. We chose to proceed with the sale and preserve the option of emergency relief if the title search uncovered a recorded transfer. This was the central balance of the week: move quickly without moving blindly. Every aggressive step had a cost. Freeze Marcus out too early, and he might warn the syndicate. Wait too long, and he might get a forged document recorded. Confront Tasha, and she might accelerate the medical scheme. Pretend to cooperate, and I had to tolerate her standing in my bedroom, telling me which sweaters I could take to a facility I had never chosen. I wrote those trade-offs in the same notebook where I had recorded the fake inspector's phrases. Years later, that notebook would be the clearest record of why I made decisions that might otherwise look reckless. I was not trying to punish Marcus by letting a dangerous deadline approach. I was trying to create a safe exit before he understood his collateral had disappeared. After attorney, Vance finished the title protection work. I opened the leather address book from my commercial real estate years. The name I needed was Richard Vance, Chief Executive of Apex Development. For 5 years, Richard had tried to buy my Alpharetta property because my corner lot sat in the path of a planned luxury retail project. I had always refused. Elias and I built that house together, and until that week, I could not imagine putting a price on it. Now sentiment had become a vulnerability. If I sold to a buyer with cash-experienced counsel and a reason to close fast, Marcus's forged deed would become useless before his lenders arrived. Richard answered on the second ring. I told him the property was finally available for $1.2 million cash below its full residential value because I needed certainty and speed more than I needed the last possible dollar. He tried to bargain me down to $800,000. I reminded him that I knew the zoning, traffic counts, frontage, and assembly value of the site better than anyone in his office. He needed my parcel to complete the footprint his investors had been assembling for years. $1.2 million was the price. The deal also had to close no later than Thursday afternoon, and his team had to keep negotiations confidential until the deed was submitted for recording. I did not ask him to hide a legal sale from the government or falsify a public record. I asked him to keep a private transaction, private until it was complete. Richard stopped negotiating and agreed subject to a rapid title examination and one physical walkthrough. Because Marcus had installed cameras around the front of the house, we scheduled the walkthrough for 2 o'clock Thursday morning through the rear entrance. After I ended the call, Andre and I made a list instead of panicking. Passport, birth certificate, Elias's blueprints, my jewelry, medication, the original trust documents, Andre's school records, 2 changes of clothes. Everything else could stay. Furniture was replaceable. The photographs that mattered were scanned. The house itself was already becoming something I had to release. Andre asked where we would go. I chose Hilton Head, South Carolina, because I had business contacts there, access to legal counsel, and enough distance to get us outside Marcus's immediate reach without disappearing into nowhere. I reserved an oceanfront suite under my own name because running did not mean becoming a fugitive. We were leaving a dangerous situation, not hiding from the law. That Wednesday evening, I also gave my attorney written authorization to contact the Georgia Bureau of Investigation if the syndicate appeared on the property after the sale. Apex Security would secure its property, document any unlawful entry, and call law enforcement. My role was to get Andre out before any of that happened. By midnight, the plan was set. At 2 o'clock Thursday morning, a black Apex van stopped in the service lane behind the house. Richard sent a licensed inspector, a title attorney, a paralegal, and a locksmith. They entered through the kitchen and worked without conversation. The inspector checked the roof foundation, electrical panel, plumbing, and visible structural systems. The attorney compared my original deed with county records and reviewed my affidavit stating that I had never signed the quitclaim document Marcus possessed. The locksmith measured the cylinders and programmed replacement hardware that could be activated after closing. The visit was quiet and methodical, which was precisely why I trusted it. We were reviewing the final purchase contract in the dining room when headlights swept across the front windows. Tasha's white SUV rolled into the driveway at an hour when no reasonable person should have been visiting. She had told me earlier that she might bring more packing supplies, and apparently suspicion had dragged her out of bed. I signaled the Apex team toward the basement wine cellar Elias had built beneath the rear half of the house. It was the only place 4 adults could stand without being visible from the hall. I closed the cellar door, hurried upstairs, exchanged my blazer for a cotton nightgown, and got beneath the covers seconds before the front keypad chimed. Tasha walked straight to my bedroom without knocking. I kept my breathing slow and even. She stood beside the bed long enough for me to smell wine beneath her perfume. She muttered that she wanted to make sure I had not wandered outside, then pulled the blanket higher over my shoulder as if she were already practicing for the role of devoted daughter. I did not move. Eventually, she left the room, went downstairs, and dropped 2 flattened moving boxes near the foyer. The front door slammed. Her SUV backed out of the drive. I waited until the engine noise had disappeared before releasing the Apex team. The attorney did not joke about the interruption. He simply returned to the contract and pointed to the clauses that mattered: my warranty of authority to sell, Apex's obligation to fund the purchase, the company's right to secure the premises immediately upon transfer, and a requirement that all suspected forged instruments be reported to the title insurer. I signed the preliminary closing documents on the same marble island where Tasha had dropped the nursing home brochure 2 days earlier. By 3:30, the team was gone, and the house looked untouched. The only visible sign that anything had changed was a slim legal folder locked inside my desk. Thursday morning, Tasha returned at 9 with coffee and another stack of boxes. She ordered me to pack only what the facility would allow: a few dresses, comfortable shoes, toiletries, and medication. I moved slowly and let her believe the doctor's report had frightened me into submission. I folded old sweaters and house dresses into the boxes while she stood in the doorway checking messages on her phone. Every few minutes, she reminded me that Shady Pines would be easier than maintaining a 5-bedroom house. I thanked her for arranging everything. The words tasted bitter, but they kept her careless. Downstairs, Andre was carrying out the belongings we actually intended to keep. He moved one item at a time through the rear garden, staying below the line of the front cameras. Elias's architectural drawings went first, sealed inside waterproof tubes. Then came the jewelry box, the fireproof case containing my identification and trust documents, family photographs, medication, and a small amount of emergency cash. The rented SUV was parked behind a hedge where it could not be seen from the street. We had agreed that if Tasha came downstairs unexpectedly, Andre would abandon whatever he was carrying and go out through the laundry room as if he had been looking for a charger. Halfway through the morning, Tasha suddenly stopped talking. She said she had heard scraping in the kitchen and turned toward the stairs. Andre was below us with the steel document case in both hands. I knocked a stack of hardcover appraisal manuals from my dresser. They hit the floor hard enough to make Tasha spin back toward me. I apologized and blamed my stiff fingers. Her annoyance returned faster than her suspicion. She complained that the facility staff would need patience with me, then began restacking the books. By the time she looked downstairs again, Andre was outside, and the case was locked in the SUV. Before leaving, Tasha checked the closet and seemed satisfied by the cheap clothes still hanging there. She told me a transport van would arrive early Friday morning and that she would return that evening to make sure I was calm. I asked whether Marcus would be coming. She said he was busy handling paperwork. I pretended not to understand what kind. The moment her SUV disappeared, Andre and I checked our list. Everything essential was out. Everything left behind belonged to a house I had already decided to sell. That distinction gave me more peace than I expected. I was not being driven from my home. I was choosing what part of my life came with me. When the last document case was in the SUV, Andre came back upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed while Tasha was downstairs taking a phone call. He looked around the room and asked whether I was sure about selling. The question stopped me. Elias had chosen the mahogany trim. I had picked the bay windows. Tasha had learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. Andre had once built a pillow fort under the dining table and refused to come out until his grandfather promised him pancakes. A property can be an asset on paper and still contain a map of your life. I told Andre the house had done its job. It sheltered us when Elias was alive, held our family when it was healthy, and gave me financial security after retirement. Keeping it now would not preserve those memories. It would only give Marcus something valuable to threaten. We were taking the irreplaceable parts with us, the drawings, photographs, documents, and each other. Andre nodded and looked relieved. He had been afraid I was sacrificing the house for him. I told him not to carry that burden. I was selling because the property was mine, and because I had decided that protecting our freedom was a better use of it than protecting a building. When Tasha came back upstairs, she found us sorting sweaters and assumed we were discussing what I could bring to Shady Pines. She never understood that the decision she thought she was forcing had already become mine. At 4 o'clock Thursday afternoon, I sat in Richard Vance's downtown office with the final closing package in front of me. The title attorney had completed the expedited search and confirmed that county records still showed me as the lawful owner. Marcus's forged quitclaim deed had not created a valid transfer, but his earlier attempt to freeze my finances had triggered a fraud alert that now complicated the closing. When Apex's chief financial officer initiated the $1.2 million wire, the title company stopped it for enhanced review. The alert was doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect an older account holder from a suspicious transfer. Unfortunately, it could not tell the difference between Marcus's fraud and my legitimate sale. The title attorney told me that if the review rolled into the next business day, funding might not occur before the Friday deadline. I did not demand that anyone ignore the fraud controls. I demanded that they verify the correct facts. My attorney transmitted the bank's notes from Marcus's visit, my in-person identification, the trust documents, the original deed, and my sworn statement that I was competent and acting voluntarily. Richard's counsel called the title company's senior underwriter and explained that the suspected abuser was not receiving a cent from the transaction. The sale proceeds were being sent to an account under my control, and the buyer had independently verified my identity. For 20 minutes, the room was silent, except for keyboards and phone calls. At 4:58, the underwriter cleared the transaction. The confirmation appeared on the screen: $1.2 million had reached my protected South Carolina account. I did not feel triumphant, so much as relieved. The house was no longer an asset Marcus could pledge. Apex filed the deed for recording and activated the new access plan. The locksmith's replacement cylinders and electronic credentials would take effect at midnight. Once Apex took possession, Marcus's old physical key and keypad code would no longer work because the lawful new owner had changed the locks. Before I left, Richard's security director gave me temporary access to the exterior and common area camera feeds through Friday morning. Apex wanted a record of anyone entering its newly purchased property before demolition crews arrived. I wanted the same record for law enforcement. The arrangement was documented in writing. For once, every piece of the plan rested on paperwork that was real. I drove back to Alpharetta through evening traffic, knowing I had to spend one final night inside the house. Tasha was waiting in the kitchen. The pendant lights reflected off a tall glass of sweet tea she had placed on the island. She pushed it toward me with a smile and said I had a big morning ahead and should relax. As I reached for the glass, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Andre's message was short: "Do not drink it." I watched her crush pills into the tea. The message changed the meaning of everything Tasha had done. Until that moment, she could still have told herself she was only helping Marcus commit financial fraud. The pills erased that excuse. She was willing to interfere with my body so I could not object when the transport team arrived. I kept my face neutral and put the phone away. Then I thanked her for the tea and lifted the glass. I let the rim touch my lips without swallowing. When she turned toward the oven, I tipped a little of the tea into the soil of a large ficus plant beside the island. A few minutes later, I repeated the move. I did not know exactly what she had crushed into the drink, and I had no intention of finding out by taste. What I did know was that the glass itself had become evidence. I left enough liquid in the bottom to be tested later, then set it where Andre could recover it after Tasha left. To convince her, I began to act drowsy. I let my shoulders slump, slowed my speech, and asked twice what time the transport van was coming. Tasha watched me carefully. When she believed the drugs were working, the false concern disappeared from her face. She leaned close and told me she was taking everything I had hoarded and that I would spend the rest of my life in the facility, while she and Marcus lived the life they deserved. The sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because I believed she would win, but because there was nothing left to misunderstand. This was my daughter speaking freely because she thought I could no longer resist. My phone was recording inside my pocket. I let my head fall forward and stayed still until I heard her laugh, collect her purse, and switch off the kitchen lights. The front door closed. Only then did I open my eyes. Andre came downstairs wearing gloves, sealed the remaining tea and the glass in separate bags, and photographed where they had been found. We were not pretending to be forensic technicians. We were simply preserving what we could until law enforcement could take custody of it. He also saved the recording to the same evidence archive as the forged deed and the doctor's bribery video. By the time Tasha's taillights disappeared at the end of the street, she believed she had left a sedated old woman helpless in the kitchen. In reality, she had handed us the clearest evidence of her intent. While we waited for midnight, Andre and I worked through an emergency checklist with Attorney Vance. We gave him the description of Marcus's car, the name Silas, from the emails the Friday deadline, and the location of the rented SUV. He told us that if anyone entered the house before we left, we were not to confront them or protect property. We were to call 911 and move away from danger if we could do so safely. I also wrote a statement in my own hand explaining that I was leaving voluntarily, that I was mentally competent, and that Andre was traveling with me because he feared for his safety and intended to seek immediate legal protection in South Carolina. I emailed a copy to counsel and sealed another with my identification. That statement could not answer every family court question, but it made one fact unmistakable. If Tasha later claimed I had wandered away in confusion, I knew exactly what I was doing. The remaining hours were filled with unglamorous details. Attorney Vance sent contact information for South Carolina counsel and forwarded the evidence necessary for an emergency filing concerning Andre. I sent copies of his identification school records, the threat mentioning his bus schedule, and the attempted withdrawal from his education trust. I called the Hilton Head Hotel and added Andre's name to the reservation. I requested a room away from the ground floor and told security only that we had a documented family safety concern and that our room number was not to be disclosed to callers. The South Carolina bank confirmed that the sale proceeds had arrived and that no one except the people named in the trust documents had transaction authority. I forwarded my mail, transferred prescriptions, canceled a cleaning appointment, and left the utilities active for Apex to take over after closing. Shady Pines received written notice through counsel that I had not consented to admission and that any document purporting to authorize my placement should be referred to my attorney. That letter gave me more peace than I expected. For 2 days I had acted helpless in front of Tasha. Outside her view, the record showed the opposite. I had been saying no with increasing precision. At 10, Andre asked whether we should simply request a police escort. We considered it seriously. Counsel told us an escort remained available if the risk became immediate, and I kept emergency services ready on my phone. We also reviewed the concealed basement egress Elias had built as a storm safety feature. It was not our preferred route. We agreed to use it only if the normal doors became unsafe or someone began watching them. Until then, we would leave through an ordinary exit like ordinary people. At 11:40, I walked once through the dark living room, touched the back of Elias's favorite chair, and returned to the kitchen. The plan was finished. What remained was to see which exit the night allowed us to use. At midnight, the house became quiet enough for every small sound to matter. I stood stretched, the stiffness from my knees, and went upstairs for the go-bag. Andre was already dressed. He carried his laptop, a backpack, and nothing else. We had agreed that if we could not carry something without slowing down, it stayed behind. The obvious exits were blocked. Marcus sat in a sedan near the front drive, smoking and watching the house. On the rear camera, we could see a security guard Tasha had hired standing near the garden gate. Whether she had hired him to stop me from wandering away or to stop me from escaping made little difference. Walking through either door would start a confrontation we could not control. Elias had given us another option years earlier. When he designed the house, he included a concealed storm shelter egress from the basement utility room to a drainage easement behind the neighboring lots. He had grown up in a part of the South where severe storms could isolate a home, and he believed every large house should have a secondary way out if fire or debris blocked the main stairs. The passage was not a secret tunnel into the municipal sewer system, as Andre first imagined when I moved the shelving unit. It was a narrow, reinforced service corridor legal when the house was built, ending at a graded opening near a wooded ravine 2 streets away. Elias concealed the interior door behind storage shelves because he hated seeing emergency hardware in finished rooms. I pulled the release and the shelving unit opened. Cool, damp air moved through the gap. Andre stared at me. I told him his grandfather had always planned for emergencies. He had simply never imagined this one. We entered single file, closed the panel, and followed the passage with a small penlight. 10 minutes later, we reached the exterior grate. Andre eased it open beneath blackberry vines, checked the street, and led me toward the rented SUV parked under an oak tree. Only after both doors were locked did I allow myself to breathe normally. Andre drove while I called my attorney and sent one sentence, "We are out." He responded that Apex's new access credentials would activate at midnight as scheduled, and that the company now controlled the property. I did not need to reset anything remotely. Marcus's keypad code and physical key had already expired because the new owner had changed the locks. We crossed into South Carolina before dawn. Hilton Head was still dark when we reached the oceanfront suite I had rented for the weekend. It was not yet my home, and I had not bought a penthouse overnight. It was simply a secure temporary place with a staffed lobby cameras and enough distance for us to think. Andre showered and slept for an hour. I could not. I sat beside the window watching the first gray light appear over the Atlantic and reviewed the evidence list with my attorney by phone. By 8:30 Friday morning, 3 things were in motion. The bank and title company had preserved Marcus's attempted transactions. My attorney had forwarded the forged deed, the bribery video, the recording of Tasha's confession, and the remaining tea sample to the appropriate investigators with a request for immediate review. And Apex Security, with the company's consent, had given us a temporary view-only link to the cameras in my former house because the buyer expected an unlawful entry. Richard did not want me directing his guards. He wanted a record. So did I. At 9 o'clock, a dark SUV pulled into the Alpharetta driveway. Marcus and Tasha stepped out with 3 men I recognized from Andre's screenshots as part of Silas's lending operation. Marcus pointed toward the brick facade with the confidence of a man who had not yet discovered that the ground beneath him had changed ownership. I could not hear every word from the exterior feed, but his gestures made the promise obvious. Empty house deed inside collateral ready. He entered his old keypad code. The lock rejected it. He tried again. Then he pulled out his key. That failed too. The first expression on his face was irritation. The second was fear. Behind him, the 3 men stopped pretending to be patient. Marcus tried to laugh off the failed lock. He told the men behind him that the battery must have died, but none of them looked amused. He went around the side of the house and broke the narrow pane beside the rear kitchen door. The moment he reached through and opened the latch, the security system sent an intrusion alert to Apex and to the monitoring service listed in the closing documents. Marcus, Tasha, and the 3 syndicate men entered a house that no longer belonged to any of them. Tasha ran upstairs first. From the hallway camera, we watched her push open my bedroom door and stop. The bed was made. The closet contained only the clothes I had deliberately left behind. The boxes she packed for the facility sat open on the floor. On the mattress, I had placed photocopies of the conservatorship paperwork torn once through the middle. She came back down the stairs shouting that I was gone and the transport team had never picked me up. Marcus looked around the stripped shelves and finally understood that the empty rooms were not evidence of a successful eviction. They were evidence of an escape. He tried to persuade the syndicate men that the deed still mattered. Then 3 Apex vehicles arrived. The first carried the company's security team. The second carried the property manager and a demolition site supervisor. The third carried counsel with certified copies of the recorded sale documents. They did not charge into the house looking for a fight. They stopped outside, called law enforcement about the armed trespassers already reported on the premises, and announced through the open rear door that everyone inside had to leave. When Marcus came into the kitchen, the Apex attorney laid a copy of the recorded deed on the island and identified Richard Vance's company as the lawful owner. The attorney also stated that the buyer had been warned about a forged instrument connected to the property and that the title insurer had opened a fraud file. Marcus stared at the document. He read my name. He read the date. He read the recording information. For the first time all morning, he stopped talking. The men from the syndicate turned on him. They did not need a lecture about real estate law to understand what had happened. Marcus had promised them collateral he did not own. The lead man asked where the $1.5 million house had gone. Marcus said I must have sold it illegally. The Apex attorney answered before I could. The seller had appeared in person, proved capacity, produced original identification signed before counsel, and received $1.2 million in a verified closing. Whatever paper Marcus carried could not transfer property that was already legally sold. Apex Security kept the groups separated while they waited for the GBI and local officers. The guards' job was to prevent violence, protect the buyer's property, preserve evidence, and let sworn officers handle arrests. The lead guard ordered the syndicate men to keep their hands visible and told Marcus and Tasha not to leave. No one moved toward anyone else. The room became a pressure chamber built out of silence. That was when I called. Tasha's phone rang in her purse. She saw my name and answered before Marcus could stop her. I held my phone so she could see the ocean through the windows of the Hilton Head suite. Andre sat a few feet away with my attorney connected on a second device. Tasha stared at the screen and demanded to know where I was, how I had left, and what I had done with the house. I gave her the answer that mattered most. The property had been sold Thursday for $1.2 million to Apex Development. The buyer had verified my identity and capacity, funded the purchase, recorded its deed, and changed the locks after taking possession. Marcus's paper could not give his lenders a house he had never owned. I made sure the men in the room could hear that last sentence. Marcus shouted that I had ruined him. I told him the sale did not create his debt, forge my name, or put his son's school routine into a threat. Those choices belonged to him. I did not give them a long recap of every discovery from the previous 3 days. The documents were already with counsel, the bank, the title company, and investigators. What Marcus and Tasha needed to understand now was simple. The collateral was gone, and the evidence was no longer inside a house they could search. Tasha tried to reduce the kitchen incident to a misunderstanding, saying the pills had only been meant to help me sleep. I told her the remaining liquid and the original recording had been preserved and turned over through counsel. Her expression changed because she finally understood that the argument would be tested outside the family. Then she noticed Andre behind me and shifted into the voice of an offended mother. She ordered him to return to Georgia immediately. Andre moved beside me. That morning he had appeared remotely in an emergency hearing with separate counsel. The court had reviewed the threat tied to his school routine, the attempted raid on his education fund, and his sworn statement that he had left voluntarily because he feared for his safety. The emergency order gave him control over where he lived, his education, and his protected finances, while the related proceedings continued. No one had kidnapped him. Andre told Tasha he had chosen to leave because the home he knew had become dangerous. His Morehouse money was intact, his school records were being transferred, and he wanted distance rather than another argument. Tasha began to cry and said still his mother. Andre did not insult her. He told her that being his mother did not give her the right to spend his future, ignore threats against him, or order him back into a crisis he had escaped. Then he stepped out of the frame. I watched Tasha stare at the empty space where he had been. The call was no longer a performance of revenge. It was noticed that the 3 things she and Marcus had tried to control, the house, the money, and Andre's choices, had moved beyond the reach of their scheme. The syndicate leader demanded the phone. Tasha handed it over because she was too shaken to argue. His face filled the screen, and he told me Marcus owed $2 million. I replied that the debt was between his organization and Marcus, not between his organization and me. I did not threaten him, bargain with him, or offer him a cent. I reminded him that he was standing inside a property owned by a company that had already reported an armed intrusion. Then I asked him to listen. Sirens were approaching. Apex's attorney had contacted the Georgia Bureau of Investigation as soon as the first armed men entered the house. Local officers arrived with GBI agents because the evidence already involved forged real estate documents, suspected elder exploitation, and threats connected to an organized lending operation. The lead syndicate man lowered the phone. His attention shifted from me to the flashing light reflecting against the front windows. The call became chaotic, but the camera feed showed the important parts. Apex Security moved everyone away from the doors and followed the officer's commands. The 3 syndicate men were disarmed and detained for questioning rather than allowed to vanish into the neighborhood. Marcus tried to move toward the rear hall and was stopped outside. Tasha sat on the bottom step with both hands over her mouth. The paperwork and recordings had already done more damage to Marcus's position than any weapon could. Before ending the call, I looked at Tasha one last time. I told her I had loved her for 40 years, but love did not require me to surrender my safety, my grandson, or the life Elias and I built. Then I ended the connection. For several seconds, the suite was silent. Andre stared at the black screen. I asked whether he was all right. He said he did not know yet. That was the most honest answer either of us had given all week. We had spent 3 days moving from crisis to crisis. Safety did not instantly turn terror into relief. I made tea from a fresh pitcher, not because I needed another symbol, but because I wanted one ordinary thing in the room. My attorney called 10 minutes later. Marcus had been taken into custody on suspicion of wire fraud, forgery-related conspiracy, attempted financial exploitation, and offenses connected to the threats. Tasha was being questioned separately about the medical scheme and the sedated drink. The GBI had collected the remaining tea and glass through counsel, so the chain of custody could begin properly. The doctor and notary would be investigated next. The syndicate case was far from finished. 3 men at a house were not the entire organization. That would become our next problem. But the immediate trap was over. The house was sold. The money was safe. Andre was beyond his parents' control. Friday at 5 had not arrived yet, and for the first time that week, we were no longer waiting for it. Friday afternoon passed without the explosion Marcus had promised the syndicate. 5 o'clock came and went while Andre and I sat in the temporary suite with our phones on the table. That deadline had controlled every decision we made for 3 days. When the minute hand crossed 12, nothing happened in our room. No knock, no threatening call, no vehicle appeared outside. I realized then how thoroughly fear can turn a time on a clock into a physical object. Marcus had built his week around 5 o'clock Friday as if the universe ended there. For us, the minute passed like any other. Andre asked what we would do if investigators released the men from the house or if Silas sent someone else. I told him the answer had changed. We would not solve the next threat alone. We had lawyers, law enforcement, bank records, and a buyer with its own security interests. The point of escaping was not to become better vigilantes. It was to get far enough from the crisis that institutions could do the jobs they were supposed to do. That evening, we ordered dinner to the room and watched a movie neither of us followed. Halfway through, Andre fell asleep on the sofa. I covered him with a blanket and stood at the window looking at the dark ocean. For the first time since Tasha slammed the brochure onto my counter, I allowed myself to grieve. Not the house, my daughter. I had saved myself from her plan, but there was no victory in learning how willing she had been to erase me. Later Friday evening, the next reliable update came from Attorney Vance, who had remained in Georgia while Andre and I crossed into South Carolina. He warned me first that an arrest was not a conviction, and that the most useful thing I could do now was stop narrating the case as a victory and let the evidence move through proper channels. Marcus had been booked on financial fraud and conspiracy allegations connected to the forged property documents and attempted account seizures. Tasha was held separately while investigators examined the medical and poisoning allegations. The 3 syndicate men from the house were questioned as part of the larger organized lending investigation. From that point on, the case became deliberately procedural. Officers logged evidence. The laboratory received the remaining tea. The bank and title company preserved the records they had already flagged. The original video file from the driveway and the unedited kitchen recording were transferred through counsel so investigators could authenticate them. Those time-stamped records could speak for themselves, and the people responsible for evaluating them did not need my commentary to understand what they showed. Apex boarded the broken rear glass, secured the property, and ended our temporary camera access after law enforcement finished documenting the interior. I was relieved when the feed disappeared from my tablet. The house was no longer mine, and I did not want a new habit of watching rooms I had already left. Professional consequences moved on a slower clock. Attorney Vance filed the appropriate complaint concerning the medical evaluation and supplied the licensing board only the material relevant to the doctor's conduct. His practice authority was restricted while the investigation proceeded. The notarial irregularities were referred separately to the proper state office. Final disciplinary decisions would come later after investigators and licensing officials had completed their reviews. That slower sequence mattered to me because it corrected something the previous week had distorted. Tasha and Marcus had tried to make paperwork perform instant magic, one report, one signature, one forged deed, and suddenly they imagined a life could be reassigned. Real accountability was slower. Each institution examined only the piece it had authority to examine. Nothing dramatic happened all at once, but the result was stronger because no consequence depended on my anger. On Saturday morning, Andre and I met with South Carolina Council to turn the emergency order from Friday into an ordinary plan for the weeks ahead. Because the emergency emancipation order was already in effect Saturday, was about making it workable, rather than asking Andre to prove the same danger again. The attorney reviewed the certified order with him line by line, where he could live, who could make school decisions, how his protected education funds would be administered, and what notice his parents would receive. Andre asked more questions than I did. He wanted to know whether accepting my help meant I controlled his money. The answer was no. The trust existed for his benefit. The court order protected his independence, and my role was to help him use both responsibly, rather than replace one form of control with another. Counsel explained that routine service and certification steps would continue, but the operative protections were already in force. We arranged temporary enrollment at a private preparatory school while he completed his Morehouse application. We updated emergency contacts and made sure school staff understood that information about his schedule was not to be released casually. Only then did I begin deciding where we would live. The oceanfront suite Tasha saw on the video call was a rental, not an overnight purchase. I spent the weekend meeting with brokers and found a permanent penthouse in a secure building a short drive away. I bought it using existing retirement investments and a portion of the Alpharetta proceeds, leaving most of the $1.2 million sale money invested through the trust. I was not going to overextend myself merely to make the new life look glamorous. The apartment was bright, quiet, and smaller than the house Elias built, which turned out to be a relief. Andre chose the bedroom with the longest wall for a desk and bookshelves. I chose the room facing the water. We bought only what we needed. There were no inherited expectations in those rooms, no boxes chosen for me by someone else, and no argument over how much space I was allowed to occupy. I joined a local preservation committee because buildings were still the work I understood, and I needed at least one conversation each week that had nothing to do with criminal charges. Our first days in South Carolina were not a parade of luxury purchases. They were ordinary Axe Groceries school forms, pharmacy transfers, new keys, and a dining table that belonged to us because we selected it. Attorney Vance also began a broader review of my estate documents, but we did not try to complete a lifetime of planning in one frantic weekend. The immediate crisis had taught me enough about haste. This time, every document would be read slowly, signed in daylight, and understood before it became part of our future. The first night in this permanent penthouse was quieter than the hotel, and somehow harder. Hotel rooms are designed to feel temporary. Bare apartments ask whether you intend to stay. We had only 2 mattresses, a folding table, 4 chairs, and boxes stacked against the walls. The ocean view was beautiful, but beauty does not unpack a life. Andre opened the tube containing Elias's blueprints and spread one across the folding table. It was the original elevation of the Alpharetta house, drawn in my husband's precise hand. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Andre asked whether hanging it in the new place would make me sad. I told him it would make the wall ours. We framed one blueprint and stored the rest professionally. I placed my wedding photograph beside it. Andre chose a photograph of Elias teaching him to hold a ruler straight. Those were the first objects we displayed. Not jewelry, not a deed, people. The next morning we went shopping for a sofa. That Monday errand nearly made me cry. Tasha had spent the week telling me where I would sleep, what I could pack, and how much space I deserved. Standing in a furniture store, arguing with Andre over whether a gray sectional was too large, felt like proof that choice had returned. We bought the smaller sofa. That weekend, I cooked breakfast in the new kitchen and burned the first batch of biscuits because I was still learning the oven. Andre laughed harder than the mistake deserved. I realized he had not laughed like that in days. Those ordinary scenes mattered precisely because nothing dangerous happened in them. They explained why we stayed. South Carolina was not simply the place we fled to. It became the place where ordinary decisions started belonging to us again. A week later, the last pieces of the move became official. I changed my mailing address with the institutions that mattered, transferred my prescriptions to a local pharmacy, and gave the building manager a short list of people who were allowed to receive information about us. Andre updated his school emergency contacts so that calls about his attendance would go to me and his attorney while the court order was in effect. I also wrote to 2 old friends in Atlanta and told them only what they needed to know. I was safe. Andre was safe, and I was not discussing Tasha's case while charges were pending. One of them called and cried because she had known Tasha since childhood. I cried too. Then we talked about Elias church picnics and the first commercial property I ever appraised. That conversation reminded me that leaving Georgia did not require erasing Georgia. I could keep the people and memories that had been good to me without reopening the doors that had become dangerous. By the end of that week, our new address no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like home. The legal side of that first week was filled with interviews. Investigators asked the same questions in different ways, which at first felt as if they doubted me. Attorney Vance explained that repetition was part of testing a timeline. If my account changed every time a defense lawyer would use the differences. So I stopped trying to sound persuasive and answered only what I remembered. Andre was interviewed separately with counsel present. I was not in the room. That was important. His account needed to be his own, not a version shaped by looking at his grandmother before every answer. When he came out, he looked exhausted, but relieved. He said the investigator had asked whether I pressured him to leave Georgia. He told them no. He said he was the one who came to me after finding the forged deed. The laboratory report on the tea took time. The medical board investigation took longer. The title insurer examined the notary seal and signature history. The bank reviewed access logs. The different clocks of the investigations became clear. Some evidence produced immediate safety measures, while other evidence required laboratory work, document review, interviews, and weeks or months before prosecutors were ready to act. I kept a calendar on the kitchen wall of the new penthouse. Blue ink for Andre's school dates, black ink for my business appointments, red ink for legal deadlines. At first, the red marks dominated the page. Gradually, the blue and black ones took over. That visual change was the first sign that we were rebuilding rather than merely escaping. 1 week after the arrests, my phone displayed a collect call from the Fulton County Jail. I accepted it because I wanted to hear what Tasha would say when there was no house, no Marcus beside her, and no audience to impress. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. She said she was terrified. She said Marcus was trying to blame her for everything. She said jail was cold and humiliating and that she needed money for a lawyer and bond. Then she reached for the oldest argument between parent and child. I was her mother, therefore I had to help. I listened without interrupting. She told me she had only wanted the family to be secure. She said Marcus had pressured her. She insisted the pills were supposed to calm me, not harm me. She asked me to remember birthday parties, school recitals, and the years when she was still a little girl who climbed into my bed during thunderstorms. Those memories were real. So was the glass of drugged tea. When she finally stopped talking, I told her one thing. I would not finance a defense designed to deny what she had done to me and Andre. She had a lawyer, a court, and the same right to due process I expected for myself. What she did not have was a right to my money. Then I ended the call and blocked the jail number. I thought that would be the last direct consequence of Marcus's debt. It was not. From his cell, Marcus made one more desperate decision. Through an intermediary, he sent word to Silas's organization that I had the proceeds from the house and was living in Hilton Head. He gave them enough information to find our building. In trying to move the danger away from himself, he pointed it back toward his own son. The warning arrived through ordinary security systems Andre had helped me configure after we moved. The building required visitors to register at the front desk, and residents could review alerts when an unknown device repeatedly tried to connect to the guest network. Over several days, the same man appeared in the lobby, the parking area, and the coffee shop across the street. He never approached us. He simply watched. Andre noticed the pattern because he had become meticulous about logs after Atlanta. He was a gifted cybersecurity student, but I had made him promise that protecting us would not mean breaking into other people's systems. So he worked from information. We had a right to see our router logs, the building's visitor records camera footage provided by management and public corporate filings. The unknown man had used the same shell company name when signing for 2 deliveries. That company traced through public records to an investigator who had previously worked for a debt collection firm associated with people in Silas's network. We reported the pattern to building security. The manager reviewed camera footage and found the man photographing entrances and recording the times Andre left for school. A maintenance employee also discovered an unfamiliar magnetic device attached beneath our vehicle during a routine service check. We did not touch it. Security called local police, who removed it and documented it. That was the moment the threat became more than our suspicion. Andre and I sat at the dining table that evening with our attorney on speakerphone. I wanted to leave Hilton Head immediately. Every protective instinct in me said to pack another bag and move before nightfall. Andre surprised me by saying no. He was tired of having his address dictated by his father's fear. If we ran every time Marcus told a dangerous person where we lived, we would spend our lives running. He was right, but courage without a plan is only another form of recklessness. We gathered the evidence we already possessed and reviewed the encrypted drive Andre had taken from Marcus's home office before we left Georgia. I had scolded him for taking it at the time because I did not want him collecting evidence by trespassing. Then I remembered that Marcus and Tasha's house had also been Andre's legal residence. The drive had been in a shared family office, and Andre had grabbed it with his own school files during the evacuation. We did not explore it further ourselves. We handed it to counsel and asked whether federal investigators should see it. Attorney Vance called back within an hour. The answer was yes. The drive appeared to contain financial records connected to interstate transfers, cryptocurrency accounts, and companies mentioned in Marcus's messages. Combined with the surveillance around our new home and the threat against Andre, the matter had moved beyond a family fraud case. The next morning, we would take everything to federal authorities serving the South Carolina Lowcountry. I slept badly that night. Before dawn, I found Andre in the kitchen making toast. He asked whether I regretted selling the house instead of handing it over and ending the original debt. I told him I regretted that adults had put him in a position to ask that question. Giving criminals an asset under threat would not have ended the danger. It would have rewarded it. The better answer was to make the evidence useful enough that the people behind the threats lost the ability to keep making them. At 9, we left together. This time, there was no hidden passage, no disguise, and no midnight drive. We walked through the front door of our building in daylight, with our attorney's evidence packet between us. The federal office serving the region looked ordinary from the inside. There was a security desk, a waiting area, and a receptionist who would have handed us a standard complaint form if Attorney Vance had not called ahead. Within 20 minutes, Andre and I were in a conference room with agents assigned to financial crime and organized lending cases. We brought a chronological packet rather than relying on memory alone. The packet contained the key records already preserved by the bank, title company state investigators and our lawyers, plus the new South Carolina surveillance reports. The agents could see the existing timeline for themselves. I focused on what was new: the repeated watcher near our building, the photographs of entrances, the device found beneath our vehicle, and the possibility that Marcus had redirected the syndicate toward us after his arrest. Andre explained what he had personally observed and what information came from systems he was authorized to see. We separated facts from assumptions. Then Attorney Vance placed the encrypted drive on the table and described exactly where it had come from. The agents did not plug it into a laptop and start browsing. They documented possession, consulted a prosecutor, and obtained the legal authority necessary to examine its contents. Andre supplied the password used on the shared household system. Forensic review revealed records linking Marcus to payment flows among shell companies' offshore accounts and cryptocurrency wallets. Some names overlapped with subjects in an existing investigation of Silas's lending network. The drive did not magically solve an entire federal case, but it filled gaps in a financial map investigators had been building for years. More important for our safety recovered communications, referenced the investigator in Hilton Head and a team expected to move toward South Carolina on Friday night. The room changed after that discovery. Agents arranged protection around our residence, coordinated with Georgia authorities, and developed legal process for relevant jail communications. I was instructed not to contact Silas, not to bait anyone into coming, and not to play detective. I agreed immediately. For the next day, we lived under a strange version of normality. Andre attended class under a safety plan. I went to a short preservation board meeting because agents preferred predictable movements they could protect over sudden disappearances. 2 unmarked vehicles sat far enough away that most residents never noticed them. The man who had been circling our building vanished by afternoon. At dinner, Andre asked what would happen if the syndicate simply stopped coming. I said that would be a victory too. The goal was not to stage another confrontation. It was to remove their ability to threaten us. Late Thursday of the following week, an agent called to say teams in Georgia had obtained warrants based on the broader financial investigation. For the first time, the next move did not belong to our family at all. The operation began before sunrise the following Friday. I learned most of the details afterward through court filings and conversations with investigators. Federal agents and state partners executed search and arrest warrants at several Atlanta locations connected to Silas's organization, including an office disguised as a financial consulting business and a warehouse used to store records and property taken from borrowers. They seized financial ledgers, computers, illegal weapons, and documents tied to a series of coercive loans. Silas and several senior associates were arrested. A separate team stopped the vehicle carrying the men investigators believed had been sent toward South Carolina. No one reached our building. There was no gun battle outside our home and no need for Andre to watch another violent confrontation. By breakfast, the agents assigned to us said the immediate threat had been contained. For Marcus, the consequences grew. He had originally been facing state and federal exposure for fraud, forgery, and the attempted theft of my assets. The recovered communications now suggested that even after his arrest, he had directed dangerous people toward the mother and son he claimed he was trying to protect. Prosecutors added allegations tied to racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. He was not sentenced that morning, and no one could truthfully promise he would spend the rest of his life in prison. What became clear was that he was now facing decades of potential imprisonment if convicted. The public story broke quickly. Local reporters focused on the lending network, not on me, which was exactly what I wanted. I declined interviews. Andre declined them too. We did not need our faces attached to every headline about Silas. Our lawyer issued a brief statement saying we were cooperating with authorities and would not comment while cases were pending. Tasha reacted differently. 2 days after investigators dismantled the immediate syndicate threat, a friend posted bond for her on the state charges that allowed release. She walked out determined to recast herself as Marcus's victim. Within days, she filed for divorce and told anyone who would listen that her husband had forced her into the scheme. Some of that may have been true in the sense that Marcus's debt created the crisis. Whatever pressure Marcus had created, the evidence already showed decisions Tasha had made on her own. Her next move was civil. She hired an aggressive attorney who sent us a demand letter claiming I had interfered with her parental relationship taken. Andre, across state lines, inflicted emotional distress and deprived her of an expected inheritance by selling the Alpharetta house. The demand for $10 million was so disconnected from reality that Attorney Vance laughed when he first read it. I did not. A weak claim can still consume time, money, and attention if you treat it casually. Vance answered the letter with the ownership records, the emancipation orders, and noticed that we would seek fees if she pursued claims without factual support. Tasha rejected the answer and told her attorney to proceed. For several weeks, the lawsuit existed only as a threat hanging over us, which gave Andre and me a small window to learn how to function after the syndicate raid before another legal fight demanded our attention. After the federal operation, prosecutors warned us that the criminal cases could take months. I had imagined the syndicate collapsing and our fear disappearing on the same morning. Human nerves do not obey warrants. Andre started his preparatory school carrying 2 phones his own and a small emergency device provided under the safety plan. For the first week, he sat where he could see classroom doors. At lunch, he checked the parking lot before walking outside. His counselor called me after noticing he flinched whenever an unfamiliar adult asked his name. We found him a therapist who worked with teenagers after family violence. Andre resisted the word trauma because he associated it with weakness. The therapist did not argue. She asked him to describe what his body did when he heard a car idle outside. He said his shoulders tightened and his attention split between the conversation and the window. She told him that was not weakness. It was a nervous system doing a job after the danger had changed. I began seeing a counselor too. I had spent the crisis congratulating myself for staying calm, but calm can become another disguise. I still checked the lock twice at night. I still watched Tasha's face in my mind whenever someone handed me a drink I had not poured. I still woke at 2 a.m, certain I had heard the front keypad chime. Those sessions did not soften my view of what happened. They made me less interested in replaying it. By the time Tasha filed her civil suit, Andre and I were functioning again. That was why her claim felt so intrusive. We had finally built days that did not begin with Marcus's debt, and now a process server was trying to drag the crisis back into the center of our lives. I decided to fight the suit thoroughly, but I also promised Andre that court would not become our new full-time occupation. He had school, I had work. Tasha would receive the attention the law required, not the attention her anger demanded. When the complaint was finally filed and a hearing date was set, I chose to appear in person, so there could be no argument that I was confused, coerced, hiding, or unable to speak for myself. Andre chose to return as well, but only for a private meeting with the court. He was legally emancipated by then. He was not coming to defend my decision. He wanted the judge to hear directly that leaving Georgia had been his decision too. The Fulton County Superior Court building looked exactly as I remembered from years of appraisal disputes: stone security glass, long corridors, and people carrying folders, as if paper alone could decide who was telling the truth. I wore a charcoal St. John knit suit, a string of pearls Elias had given me, and low leather heels. I was not dressing for revenge. I was dressing as the person I had been before my daughter decided age had erased her, a professional who understood documents, deadlines, and the cost of careless statements. Attorney Vance met me at the security desk. He carried 2 binders. The first contained the Emancipation Order school records and Andre's sworn statement that he had left Georgia voluntarily. The second contained the financial and criminal evidence relevant to Tasha's claims. We agreed not to turn the hearing into a second criminal trial. The judge did not need every ugly detail. She needed enough to determine whether Tasha had a valid civil claim and whether anything I had done concerning Andre was unlawful. Tasha arrived with her civil attorney. She had traded her designer clothes for a faded blue cardigan and wore her hair in a loose knot. I recognized the strategy because I had seen developers do the same thing in zoning hearings, dress like the person you want the decision-maker to imagine. Her attorney's opening statement portrayed me as a wealthy matriarch who had used money to isolate a vulnerable teenager from his mother. He said I sold the family home out of spite, spirited Andre across a state line, and then used expensive lawyers to manufacture an emancipation order after the fact. The judge asked him a simple question: what property interest did Tasha have in my house before the sale? He had no good answer. The deed had been in my name. There was no contract promising Tasha ownership, no recorded life estate, no partnership, no signed transfer. Expected inheritance is not present ownership. That single point stripped much of the drama from his real estate claim. Tasha took the witness stand and cried almost immediately. She said she had been worried about my memory. She said Shady Pines was chosen because she believed I needed supervision. She blamed Marcus for the forged documents and claimed she learned about the syndicate only after law enforcement arrived. When her attorney asked why Andre left with me, she said I had poisoned him against his parents for years. Attorney Vance waited until cross-examination to use only the documents tied to Tasha's civil claims. He established that the house had always been mine, that Andre had left voluntarily, and that Tasha had participated in conduct serious enough for a court to grant him independent legal status. He did not march through every event of the week or ask her to agree that she was evil. He asked narrow questions about ownership, consent, and Andre's reasons for leaving. Her answers became shorter. Then he played a brief excerpt from the recording made in my kitchen, only enough for the judge to hear Tasha tell a woman she believed sedated that she intended to take everything. Her attorney objected that the recording belonged in the criminal case. The judge allowed limited use because Tasha herself had placed my mental state, her benevolent intent, and Andre's reasons for leaving directly at issue. Tasha stopped crying. Attorney Vance next produced the emergency orders from South Carolina and the final emancipation decision. The documents showed that Andre had appeared before a judge had separate counsel for the hearing and had stated under oath that he chose to remain with me because he feared the consequences of Marcus's debt. There was no kidnapping theory left to argue. A parent can be devastated by a child's lawful decision and still have no civil claim against the person the child chose to live with. Tasha's attorney tried to recover by attacking my character. He asked whether I had deliberately allowed Tasha and Marcus to walk into a trap at the Alpharetta house. I answered that I sold my property to a willing buyer left before the Friday deadline and notified counsel about a credible threat. Apex not I controlled security after closing. Law enforcement not I decided whom to detain. He asked whether I enjoyed watching the FaceTime call. I told him I enjoyed knowing my grandson was alive. Attorney Vance then addressed Andre's finances because Tasha had claimed I manipulated him with money. The records were funds legally designated for Andre's support and education distributions from a custodial account school, reimbursements, and money. Elias had set aside for his grandson's needs. Tasha had repeatedly redirected those funds toward luxury purchases, while Andre's school meal balance went unpaid and basic expenses were delayed. The point was not that buying an expensive handbag makes someone an unfit mother. The point was that the pattern contradicted her claim that I had invented concerns about Andre's welfare to control him. Bank statements showed a support distribution entering her account, followed hours later by a purchase at a Buckhead boutique. School notices from the same week showed overdue fees. Another month money earmarked for a coding program was withdrawn, and a spa charge appeared on the card. Andre had emails asking his mother whether he could still attend the program. She never answered him. Tasha's attorney objected that the evidence was prejudicial. The judge replied that Tasha had made her parenting and Andre's supposed financial manipulation central to the case. She could not open that door and then complain when records came through it. Andre did not testify in open court. The judge had already met with him privately and reviewed his sworn statement. I was grateful for that. He had spent enough time being used as proof by adults. When the judge returned from a short recess, her expression told me the case was nearly over. She dismissed Tasha's claims concerning kidnapping and return of custody because the emancipation order controlled. She dismissed the inheritance claim because Tasha had no present ownership interest in my former house or my estate. She dismissed the emotional distress theory after finding the complaint failed to overcome the documented reasons for Andre's departure and my legitimate property sale. She did not declare Tasha a monster. Judges are not supposed to write family morality plays. She said the lawsuit had been used to relitigate consequences created by Tasha's own conduct. Then came the part Tasha's attorney had not expected. Because several claims lacked factual or legal support even after counsel had been warned, the court ordered sanctions and required Tasha to reimburse a substantial portion of my attorney fees. The order created a judgment that could be enforced against lawful income and assets under ordinary collection rules. It did not depend on guessing what job Tasha might hold in the future. Tasha stood and shouted that the system was rigged. A bailiff told her to sit down. She shouted again this time at me that I had stolen her son and her future. I did not answer. I collected my handbag and waited until the judge left the bench before walking out. The courthouse steps were crowded with lawyers and families carrying problems that had nothing to do with ours. Tasha came out several minutes after me, still arguing with her attorney about the sanctions order. For 1 second, she looked exactly like the teenager who used to slam her bedroom door when she did not get what she wanted. Then she saw Andre waiting beside Attorney Vance and stopped. Andre had chosen to attend the hearing, but not sit through every accusation. The judge had already reviewed his statement privately, and he had no interest in becoming a spectacle in the hallway. Tasha walked toward him slowly and asked whether he hated her. Andre said no. He told her hate required more energy than he wanted to keep spending. He said he hoped she would eventually take responsibility for what she had done, but he was not willing to keep explaining why he had left. Then he asked her not to contact him outside the channels allowed by the court. Tasha looked at me as if she expected me to soften the boundary for her. I did not. Andre's decision belonged to Andre. We walked away together before the conversation could turn into another argument. In the car, neither of us celebrated. Winning the civil case had protected us from a lawsuit, but it had not repaired a family. Andre stared out the window and said he was tired of being evidence. That sentence stayed with me. For months, adults had been using documents about him to prove something. The trust records proved financial misuse, the threat proved danger, the emancipation order proved legal independence, and his school records proved where he had chosen to build a new routine. All of those records mattered, but he was still a 16-year-old boy who wanted to think about classes and college rather than hearings. I promised him we would let the criminal cases move on their own schedule. If prosecutors needed us, we would cooperate. Otherwise, our calendar would belong to us again. Back in South Carolina, I removed the court hearing from the wall calendar and replaced it with Andre's application deadlines. The red legal marks were still there, but they no longer filled every week. That change was small enough that nobody outside our home would have noticed it. To me, it felt like the first real victory after the house was sold, a future in which the next important date did not have Marcus's name attached to it. On the flight back to Hilton Head, Andre slept with his headphones on while I reviewed none of the legal documents in my bag. That was deliberate. For the first time in months, I allowed a folder to remain closed. When we landed, we stopped at a small diner instead of going straight home. Andre ordered pancakes even though it was nearly evening. I ordered coffee and asked him what he wanted the next 6 months to contain if we could choose the subjects ourselves. He said he wanted to finish his school year without changing addresses again, complete his Morehouse application, volunteer, somewhere that needed computer help, and learn to drive without a security plan attached to every trip. I said I wanted to return to real estate work in a limited way, make friends who did not know me first, as the woman whose daughter tried to take her house and cook one decent meal a week. Andre laughed at the last goal and said I should begin with something less ambitious. We wrote the list on the back of a paper placemat. Nothing on it involved winning. Nothing involved Marcus Tasha Silas, a judge, or a bank. I folded the placemat and kept it in my purse for months. Whenever another legal notice arrived, I looked at that list before answering it. The case would receive whatever response was necessary, but it would not be allowed to become our identity. That rule did not make the remaining proceedings disappear. It gave them a boundary, which was exactly what our family had lacked for too long. The months after the civil hearing were intentionally uneventful. I learned to value uneventful. Andre went to school, came home, complained about homework, and spent too much money on computer components. I attended preservation meetings, inspected properties, and cooked badly enough that we began ordering dinner every Thursday. We learned our neighbors' names. I joined a morning walking group where nobody knew the full story until months later. On Sundays, Andre and I called one of Elias's old friends and listened to the same architectural stories we had heard a dozen times. We also created routines around money that were almost comically transparent. Andre received a monthly personal budget from his own account. He could see every education trust statement. I showed him how to read fees, beneficiary designations, and account titles. If a document affected him, he received a copy. I wanted his adulthood to be the opposite of the house he grew up in, where money was hidden until it became a weapon. When the Morehouse application opened, he hesitated before submitting it. Atlanta was home to the school, but also to the worst week of his life. We visited the campus together on a quiet Saturday. He walked beneath the trees, spoke with a student in computer science, and stood outside a residence hall, watching families unload boxes. On the drive back to South Carolina, he said, "I think I can let Atlanta be more than one house." That sentence told me he was ready before any acceptance letter did. I was changing too. I stopped referring to the Hilton Head place as temporary. I put Elias's photographs on the walls. I bought a dining table instead of eating over moving boxes. I invited people from the preservation committee for dinner. The first time someone set a glass of iced tea in front of me, my hand paused. Then I picked it up. Recovery came as a series of moments when fear stopped deciding what happened next. Andre's work at the youth center became part of that ordinary life. He began with a Saturday class for teenagers who had never had anyone explain the difference between using technology and understanding it. He taught them how to organize files, create strong passwords, recognize suspicious messages, and ask an adult for help before a small online problem became a large one. He deliberately avoided telling heroic stories about hacking his father's accounts. By then, he understood that curiosity without boundaries can create its own damage. One afternoon, I arrived early to pick him up and heard him speaking to a boy whose mother had lost access to an email account after a scam. The boy was embarrassed. Andre told him embarrassment was exactly what scammers relied on. Then he helped the family make a list of legitimate recovery steps and suggested they contact the provider through official support channels. I watched from the doorway and saw how much Andre had changed. In Atlanta, information had been something he collected because adults would not tell him the truth. In South Carolina, he was learning to use information to make people less afraid. The center director later asked him to give a short speech at a fundraiser. Andre hated public speaking, but he agreed. He talked about how easy it is for young people to assume adults control every important system: money, property, school records, legal documents. He told them that becoming independent starts with learning what your name is attached to and asking questions when something does not make sense. He never mentioned Tasha or Marcus. Afterward, an older businessman shook his hand and offered him a summer internship. Andre thanked him and said he was already committed to helping me with the pavilion renovation. On the drive home, I teased him that he had just turned down his first corporate opportunity to work for his grandmother. He said, "You pay in food." I said, "Then you are severely undercompensated." That was the kind of family argument I had wanted all along. Once Andre's acceptance letter was pinned to the refrigerator, I began asking what I wanted my own next chapter to look like. Retirement had never meant inactivity to me. Before Elias died, we used to joke that I could not walk past a poorly used parcel of land without mentally calculating what it should become. Hilton Head and the surrounding low country gave me plenty to calculate. Most of the Alpharetta sale proceeds remained protected and invested. I used only a portion as equity, together with capital. I had accumulated over 4 decades because I wanted the new project to strengthen my finances rather than turn one emergency sale into another reckless bet. I began scouting small commercial properties where experience could create value without requiring me to build an empire from scratch. The property that interested me most was an aging retail pavilion several blocks from the waterfront. Its exterior was tired, several storefronts were vacant, and deferred maintenance had scared away tenants. The owner saw a fading asset. I saw foot traffic parking visibility and a structure that could be repositioned without tearing everything down. He asked $1.4 million. My inspection and income analysis supported a lower number. 2 roof sections needed work, the electrical service required upgrades, and the current rent roll looked better on paper than it did in actual collections. I offered $1.1 million with a short due diligence period and proof of funds. The seller rejected it immediately and told his broker I was trying to steal the property. I did not raise my offer. I sent him a clean analysis showing exactly how I reached the number and told him to call if he preferred certainty to pride. 4 days later, he called. We settled at $1.17 million with credits for verified repairs. This time, there were no secret documents, no fake inspectors, no frantic midnight closing. Every party had counsel. Every material problem went into the contract. The contrast was almost therapeutic. I had spent months watching people use real estate as a weapon. Now I was using the same profession for what I had always loved about it, turning neglected space into something useful. The renovation plan divided the pavilion into smaller storefronts for local businesses that could not afford the larger waterfront centers. A bakery signed first. Then a home goods shop owned by 2 sisters. A physical therapy practice took the end unit because the parking layout worked for older clients. Andre helped build a tenant portal for maintenance requests and rent records. I insisted the system preserve a clear history of approvals, so no future manager could rewrite decisions after the fact. He teased me that I had turned family trauma into software requirements. I told him good systems are often built after somebody learns what bad systems cost. The project also forced me back into rooms where people disagreed without threatening one another. Contractors pushed back on budgets. Tenants asked for concessions. The lender questioned my renovation reserve. We argued documented decisions, changed numbers when evidence justified it, and went home without anyone forging a signature. That ordinary professional friction reminded me how distorted the previous year had been. By the time the bakery opened, I was standing on this walkway watching delivery trucks move through the lot and realizing I had rebuilt something I thought I had lost when I sold the house. It was not the exact property or the exact money. It was professional identity. Tasha and Marcus had tried to turn my life's work into collateral for their crisis. The sale freed me to use that same experience on my own terms. The pavilion tested me before it rewarded me. 2 months into renovation, a plumbing inspection revealed that part of the old underground line had deteriorated beyond the seller's reports. Replacing it would cost far more than my contingency budget. Years earlier, I might have treated the problem as a reason to squeeze contractors until someone absorbed the loss. After what our family had survived, I had little appetite for forcing other people to pay for risks that were honestly mine. I brought the contractor, engineer, and property manager into one room and asked for options. We could patch the worst section and risk another failure, replace the full line immediately, or phase the work around tenant openings. The engineer recommended full replacement. It hurt, but the numbers supported him. I used reserves and delayed cosmetic improvements. The bakery opened with simpler finishes than planned. The home goods shop reused shelving instead of ordering custom fixtures. Nobody lost a lease. Nobody was asked to lie on an invoice. 3 months later, the plumbing problem was behind us, and the building had a system likely to last decades. That challenge did more for my confidence than the original purchase negotiation. Anyone can look brilliant when every assumption is correct. Experience matters most when the spreadsheet changes. At the first tenant opening the bakery, owner handed me a small box of pecan pastries and thanked me for taking a chance on her. I told her I had not taken a chance. I had read her business plan. She laughed and said that sounded exactly like me. Andre stood beside the register checking that the tenant portal worked on a tablet. I watched him help an employee reset an account without ever asking for the employee's password. It was a small thing, but it captured the business we were trying to build: clear permissions, documented systems, and no person powerful enough to control everything in secret. I had learned the cost of the opposite model. The criminal cases moved more slowly than the civil hearing, exactly as the prosecutors had warned us. Months passed before the important decisions arrived. Tasha eventually negotiated a plea on the state charges after laboratory testing confirmed sedating medication in the remaining tea, and investigators corroborated the false medical evaluation and the attempted financial exploitation. Her sentence included time in custody, probation, restitution treatment requirements, and financial penalties. By then, the medical board case had also completed its formal review, and the doctor who sold Marcus the false evaluation lost his license after the board sustained the misconduct findings. I did not attend the plea hearing. I submitted a written victim statement and refused to ask either for special mercy or maximum punishment. I wanted the court to decide the legal consequence, not turn my anger into another bargaining chip. Marcus resisted longer. The financial records, the forged property scheme, the laundering evidence, and the communications sent after his arrest left him little room to pretend his only mistake had been a bad investment. Eventually, he entered a federal plea covering fraud, money laundering, and racketeering-related offenses. His sentence was measured in decades because the conduct reached far beyond one attempted house transfer. When Attorney Vance called with the final number, I wrote it on the legal calendar and then closed the folder. Andre listened from the kitchen doorway. He did not smile. His father's sentence could protect him from future contact, but it could not give him back the father he should have had. Several months after Marcus was transferred into the federal prison system, a call came for Andre. He looked at the caller information, saw the correctional facility, and asked me whether he should answer. I told him that was his decision. Emancipation meant more than choosing where to live. It meant learning which doors he wanted to open and which he wanted to leave closed. He accepted the call. Marcus began by apologizing. For perhaps 30 seconds, I thought prison had stripped away some of his excuses. Then he said he had only wanted to give the family a better life. He blamed the crypto losses on dishonest partners, blamed the syndicate for escalating the debt, blamed Tasha for choosing the care facility, and blamed me for selling the house before he could fix everything. Finally, he asked Andre to send money from the Morehouse Trust to his prison account. Andre listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Andre said the trust was not a rescue fund for adults who had gambled with him. He reminded his father that the worst part was not losing money. It was giving dangerous people enough information about his school routine to make a threat believable. Marcus said he had never intended anyone to hurt him. Andre answered that intention did not erase risk after you deliberately handed fear to violent men. Then he said something I had not expected. He told Marcus he had begun the legal process of changing his last name to Jenkins, my maiden name. I was not doing it to erase his father from history. I was doing it because he wanted the name he carried into adulthood to represent the person who had protected his future, rather than used it as collateral. Marcus began to cry and told him he was destroying the family. Andre said the family had been damaged long before a court form changed a surname. Then he ended the call. Afterward, he sat at the dining table with both hands around a glass of water. He looked more tired than triumphant. Changing his name did not feel like revenge to him. It felt like admitting that the father he wanted had never existed. I sat beside him and said nothing clever. Some losses cannot be negotiated into profit. We could secure money defeat forged paperwork, win a lawsuit, and move across a state line. We could not manufacture the childhood Andre should have had. What we could do was refuse to repeat it. By the time Andre's name change order was final, Apex Development had moved well beyond securing my former property. Richard sent me a photograph from the redevelopment site. Months of permitting, demolition engineering, and site preparation had transformed the lot. The 5-bedroom brick house was gone, but Apex had salvaged a few architectural details before clearing the structure, including a section of the mahogany molding Elias designed. Richard had it delivered to me without asking. I kept one piece in my study in South Carolina. Holding it changed the way I thought about the demolition. The house had been a container for our life, not the life itself. New foundations eventually replaced the rooms where Tasha had planned my removal, and a landscaped pedestrian plaza took shape near the old driveway. I had evaluated redevelopment projects for 40 years, but this was the first time I watched land I loved become useful to strangers. The process was less violent than I had imagined. Crews documented salvaged, removed, graded, poured, inspected, and built. Change came in stages. So did the consequences for Tasha. About a year after the original Friday deadline, public records showed that she had completed the custodial portion of her sentence and was living under probation and restitution requirements. The legal fee judgment and restitution followed her income. Her old social circle had mostly disappeared, and she found steady work at a fast food restaurant on the outskirts of Atlanta. I did not treat that job as humiliation. Honest work was one of the healthiest changes available to her. The consequence was not that she wore a uniform instead of designer clothes. It was that she finally had to live within money she earned while paying obligations created by her own choices. One afternoon, a customer left a copy of Black Enterprise at the restaurant. The magazine carried a feature about older entrepreneurs building intergenerational businesses, and the writer had included a short profile of my coastal redevelopment project and Andre's role in creating its digital systems. The photograph showed us outside the renovated pavilion. I wore a white suit. Andre wore a Morehouse sweatshirt with Jenkins printed beneath his photograph in the caption. According to a letter Tasha later sent through her probation counselor, that was the moment the distance between them became real to her. She wrote that seeing his new name in print hurt more than losing the house. She said she had spent years treating money as proof that she mattered and had finally understood that every shortcut cost her something more valuable than money. She asked whether I would ever forgive her. I left the letter in a drawer for several weeks because I did not want to answer from anger or nostalgia. Eventually, I wrote back. I told her I hoped she built an honest life. I told her forgiveness, if it came, would not restore her access to my finances, give her authority over my estate, or require Andre to resume contact before he was ready. If she wanted to change, she would have to do it without a reward from me. She never received the house. She never received the sale proceeds. But by then, I no longer needed her suffering to prove that I had survived. I showed Andre Tasha's letter only because his name appeared in it and because I refused to make decisions about his relationship with his mother behind his back. I told him he did not owe me a reaction. He read it once and set it on the table. Tasha had written that she missed him, that she was sorry for choosing Marcus's crisis over her son, and that she hoped he might eventually speak to her. Andre asked whether I believed her. I said I believed she was sorry about where her choices had taken her. I did not know yet whether she was sorry in the deeper way that changes future behavior. Andre said he was not ready to answer. That was enough. We asked his therapist and attorney how to handle future contact. The answer was simple boundaries could change if Andre wanted them to, but nobody should turn reconciliation into another obligation. So we created a separate mailing address for any letters Tasha sent. Andre could read them when he chose. He could ignore them. He could answer years later. The system protected choice without pretending the relationship did not exist. Over the next months, 2 more letters arrived. They contained fewer excuses. Tasha described her job, the classes required by probation, and the restitution payments. She did not ask for money. She did not ask me to change the trust. In the second letter, she apologized specifically for using my age as a weapon and for failing to protect Andre when Marcus brought criminals into their lives. I still did not invite her back. Change deserves room to prove itself. It does not require instant access to the person who was harmed. Andre eventually wrote one sentence on a blank card: "I hope you keep doing the work. I am not ready for contact." He mailed it himself. Watching him seal that envelope taught me something I had not understood during the frantic week in Georgia. A boundary is strongest when it does not need anger to hold it in place. Andre was no longer rejecting his mother to punish her. He was deciding how much of his life she could safely enter. That was adulthood arriving in a form no college acceptance letter could measure. My final estate planning meeting took place in a quiet conference room overlooking the harbor. Attorney Vance flew in from Georgia, and a South Carolina estate lawyer joined us because I wanted local counsel responsible for the documents that would govern my new property. There was nothing mystical or impenetrable about the documents, and that was precisely why the meeting mattered. We reviewed every asset: the remaining Alpharetta sale proceeds, my retirement portfolio, the Hilton Head penthouse, my interest in the renovated pavilion, insurance policies, Elias's surviving intellectual property rights in a small archive of architectural plans, Andre's separate education trust. Then we reviewed who could control each asset if I became ill or died. That question had changed meaning for me. Tasha and Marcus had almost succeeded because they tried to create the appearance that I could no longer speak for myself. I did not want my response to be pretending incapacity could never happen. I was 68 when Tasha first tried to force me out of my home. One day, I might genuinely need help. Good planning meant choosing that help while I was unquestionably competent. I named an independent professional fiduciary as successor trustee, with Andre eligible to serve in a co-trustee role when he reached the age and experience requirements we set. I executed a new healthcare directive naming people who had no financial incentive to warehouse me somewhere convenient. I listed physicians who knew me and required independent medical opinions for major capacity decisions. I wrote clear instructions about where I wanted to live if I ever needed assisted care. For the generation-skipping trust, I made my intention plain. Andre and his future descendants would benefit. Tasha would not have a management role or an automatic inheritance. The document included a carefully drafted no-contest clause to discourage baseless litigation. My attorneys reminded me that courts can review trusts and laws can change. The strength came from valid execution, independent administration, clear records, and a purpose consistent with law. I signed each document with Elias's gold fountain pen. The gesture mattered because my signature had been at the center of the attack. Marcus had tried to imitate it on a quitclaim deed. Now I was using the real thing to state in my own hand what I wanted to happen to the life I had built. After the meeting, Attorney Vance asked whether I felt safer. I thought about the question. The first weeks in Hilton Head safety meant guards at the building and accounts Marcus could not touch. A year later, safety meant something quieter. No single person could take control of my money health decisions, home and grandson, through one forged document. Authority was divided. Records were duplicated. Successors were named. Andre knew where everything was, and just as important, knew what he did not control. That night I placed copies of the final plan in a fireproof cabinet and another set with counsel. Then I made dinner. The best protection I had created all year was designed to be boring. Late that summer, suitcases began appearing near Andre's bedroom door. Morehouse orientation was approaching. He had grown taller during our year in South Carolina, or maybe he simply stood differently. The oversized hoodie that once seemed like armor now hung unworn in his closet. He still loved computers, still disappeared into code for hours, and still forgot to carry his dishes to the sink when he was thinking. Trauma had not turned him into a flawless young executive. It had turned him into a young man who understood that competence did not require pretending to be invulnerable. On his last evening before leaving, we carried 2 glasses of sweet tea onto the balcony. For months I had avoided drinking it whenever someone else prepared it. I hated that Tasha had taken something ordinary and attached fear to it. Gradually, I reclaimed the habit. I brewed the pitcher myself, then later let Andre make it, then eventually stopped thinking about the glass at all. The ocean was calm. Andre raised his drink and toasted Elias. We talked about college the way families are supposed to talk about college dorm rooms, laundry meal plans, classes, money, and whether he really needed 3 different keyboards. I reminded him that the Morehouse Trust was for education and that his scholarship reduced how much he would need to draw. He reminded me that I had already repeated that information 12 times. Then he asked whether I would be lonely. I told him I hoped so a little. Loneliness would mean our life was finally normal enough for him to leave, he laughed. Before going inside, he gave me a small framed photograph. It showed the old Alpharetta house before any of the trouble taken one Christmas when Elias was still alive. On the back, Andre had written, "A building is not the legacy. The people who protect each other are." I kept the photograph beside the salvaged piece of mahogany molding in my study. The next morning, we drove to Atlanta. I had wondered whether returning would make my chest tighten. Instead, the city looked like itself: traffic, heat, construction, cranes, familiar exits. We passed miles away from the site of the old house without detouring. That chapter did not need one more inspection. At Morehouse, Andre carried his own boxes into the residence hall. I tried to help and was told politely that I was supervising too much. By noon, his desk was assembled. By 1, he had met 2 roommates and forgotten I was standing there. I hugged him at the curb. He said, "Grandma, you know I'm coming home for Thanksgiving." I said, "I know." What I did not say was that hearing the word home no longer made me picture Alpharetta. Home had moved with us. My daughter believed my age made me movable. That assumption started the crisis, but it is not the lesson I carry most strongly now. What stays with me is how quickly a family can lose its sense of proportion when money becomes the measure of loyalty. Tasha looked at a house and saw the lifestyle she believed she deserved. Marcus looked at the same house and saw one more way to postpone the consequences of a debt he had created. I looked at it and saw Elias' Christmas morning's repair bills, tax receipts, and the place where a grandson learned to read. All of those meanings could exist at once, but only one fact decided the legal question: the house belonged to me. I had the right to choose whether I stayed sold downsized or left it empty. Defending that simple fact required more than a dramatic confrontation. It required records, witnesses, competent counsel institutions willing to question suspicious authority, and the discipline to keep moving when fear tried to make every decision urgent. I also learned that expertise is most useful when it keeps a person from becoming reckless. My real estate background helped me recognize the fake inspector, understand why speed had value in a cash sale, and choose a buyer capable of closing properly. It did not make me above the law or capable of solving organized crime by myself. The moments that saved us were often ordinary: a bank manager who refused incomplete paperwork, a title company that slowed a suspicious transaction until it could verify the truth, lawyers who documented my wishes, school staff who protected Andre's schedule, investigators who separated evidence from emotion, and a court that listened to a teenager as a person rather than as property between adults. Those systems were not perfect or instant. They were simply stronger than the shortcuts Marcus and Tasha kept choosing. Andre's part of the story taught me something different. Protecting a young person does not mean making every decision for him. At first, I wanted to move him, hide him, control his schedule, and answer every question before he could be frightened by it. The crisis forced me to protect him quickly, but the months afterward forced me to return control. He learned where his money was, how his trust worked, what documents affected him, and which decisions belonged to him. He chose whether to speak to his parents. He chose his new name. He chose Morehouse. By the time I left him at the residence hall, he no longer needed me to stand between him and every danger. That was the point. A protected child should eventually become an independent adult, not a permanent beneficiary of somebody else's control. I changed too. For years after Elias died, I had treated the Alpharetta house as proof that I was preserving our life together. Selling it felt for a few hours like I was surrendering something sacred. I know now that memory does not live in square footage. A section of Elias's mahogany molding hangs in my study. His blueprint hangs over the dining table. His grandson carries the values he tried to teach him. The land itself belongs to another future, and that is all right. The new pavilion in South Carolina taught me the same lesson from the other direction. Property can change use without erasing what came before. So can people. I do not know what Tasha will become. Her letters grew more accountable over time, but accountability is not something I can award her for saying the right words. It has to appear in the life she builds when nobody is offering her a house money or access in return. I hope she succeeds. Hope is cheaper than trust, and unlike trust, it does not require me to hand her a key. My estate plan reflects that difference. If I become ill one day, I have chosen independent people and institutions to handle specific responsibilities. No single person can control my medical decisions, home finances, and grandson through one document. Andre knows where the records are and what each person can do. The arrangement is deliberately boring. After a year of fraud threats hearings and emergency decisions, boring became one of my favorite forms of security. Sometimes people ask whether I went too far when I sold the house before Tasha could take it, refused to fund her defense, fought her civil lawsuit, and declined to rescue Marcus from the consequences of his debt. I cannot answer that question for every family. I can answer only for mine. Forgiveness does not require surrendering title. Love does not require accepting fraud. Being a mother does not require becoming collateral. I handled the real estate because that part was mine to handle. Then I learned the harder task, letting the law handle crimes, letting Andre handle his adulthood, letting Tasha handle her consequences, and letting the past remain behind us without pretending it never happened.